Terrestrial Defense Corp Dai-Guard. This series had such a weird appeal to me. The idea of some kind of monster attack in the future distant time of 2018. A monster rises out and causes so much destruction, and the only answer is basically a nuke, and there's so much loss of life that the Japanese people ultimately decide to make their own giant fighting robot. As you do. The only problem is no more monsters attack at all whatsoever. Cut to years later in 2030, a little bit more distant, and the robot that they created, Dai-Guard, is nothing more than a mascot for a corporation known as the 21st Century Defense Security Corporation. It's mostly just for show. They probably got it on the cheap. The military was probably just happy to get rid of it. The only downside here is that monsters then start attacking in rapid succession, like every few months or so to every few weeks. And suddenly, a young office worker named Shunizuki Akagi suddenly finds himself as one of 3 pilots to Dai-Guard because the corporation still owns the robot and they're the only people who are capable of just going in and doing something about this terrible situation. But they managed to do it. But the funny thing about this series isn't that it's just another giant robot faces off against evil, weird monsters that appear out of nowhere. It's the fact that this series is grounded in some weird realism, where a lot of the situations that our main cast of characters have to deal with is actually beyond the monster attacks. While Shinichi Akagi is so enthralled with the idea of becoming this mech pilot and fighting the good fight and saving human lives, you have the military trying to come in and being like, yeah, dude, civilians piloting a giant robot and taking the lives of the populace in their hands? Yeah, no, not cool. And that's represented by an army office worker named Shiro Shirota. A no-nonsense man in black, Mr. Smith-looking motherfucker who is very hard case on the group who pilots Dai-Guard. But the funny thing is, over time, as he gets to know the office and all that, he starts to kind of bond with them in a weird kind of way that because they endear themselves to him over time. But the team also has to deal with, civil suits and property damage, trying to keep that at a low, and the fact that the robot initially was falling apart, and every time they go into battle, like sometimes the arm of the robot would fall off, and they'd be estimating all the damages and how much they would have to pay in order to get it repaired, and it was such a weirdly realistic take on owning a giant robot, like privately owning a giant robot. And yet it felt so fun. Just so weirdly fun. It was kind of delightful to see people complaining about the little property damage that went on because of Dai-Guard's fight with a giant monster, which would have caused more property damage had Dai-Guard not done something. The idea of civilians piloting a giant robot and being the only thing that stands between Japan and utter destruction. The constant calculations that would need to be made in order to estimate, can we do these repairs? Please do not harm this, and this. We cannot fix that. And just the general idea of an office worker becoming a super robot pilot. And of course, it's not just Akagi. You have Ibuki Momoi, who has this tragic backstory where her father, who actually kind of predicted these monsters, the Heterodyne's attacks ahead of time, and how he was killed in, I think it was the very first attack, and her baggage with her stepfather, and this, that, and the other, is very emotional stuff. And the third main character, Keiichiro Aoyama, not not the most interesting character. There's a bit of a backstory going on with him. It's sweet. You get to know him over time, but he's not one of the main focuses because he's left a little bit more ambiguous in his nature for the most part. That's a major plot point as to who he is ultimately going down the line. But that's not terrible. And you have the president of the 21st century defense security, whatever, who was actually the man who originally ordered the launch of the original bomb that destroyed the monster, but also caused so much loss of human life. And so he's constantly trying to, make sure that Dai-Guard is up and running to prevent the need for that destruction to ever happen again. It's such an interesting, intricate weaving of storyline. And one of my favorite characters is definitely Rika Domeki, who is like this young genius who's always creating all these additions and add-ons, mostly to Dai-Guard's like arms and stuff. You get all these wonderful different attachments. Of course, the rocket punch, but you also get a drill arm and a net gun, this thing called the Knot Buster. Because all of the Heterodynes, of course, have a weak point you need to hit for maximum damage. The thing about those things is that's what the Heterodynes form over. These, things called fractal knots, they form, and then a lot of the area around them, like dirt, sand, water, what have you, forms around it, and it creates the Heterodyne's main body. And so you have to suss out the fractal knot and hit that weak point for maximum damage. And it's usually Momoi who's able to, scan the Heterodyne and figure out where the fractal knot is so that everybody can just go in for the maximum earth-shattering final blow. You also get this knockoff Dai-Guard called Kokubogar, which, only comes about because the army is salty that they can't own Dai-Guard, so they just build another robot. But all this other shenanigans happen. It's such fun rivalries going on. And the series doesn't overstay its welcome. It's like 26 episodes and boom, you're done. That was kind of the benefit of a lot of, short-term running series from the 90s and 2000s. Like, they came in, they did what they wanted to do, and they were done, And I love this series. I watched it on Anime Network On Demand in the mid-2000s, about around 5 years after the series had originally come out, but I loved this series. Whenever a new episode was available, I loved watching it because it was just so fascinating to me. But the director, Seiji Mizushima, he's worked on several series that I've really loved. He worked on the original Shaman King and the original Full Metal Alchemist as directors of those. And for the most part, I did enjoy the direction he took those series in. So it really was a recipe for success. And the studio that animated Zebek, dude, they created Zoids, one of my all-time favorite series out there. And Mega Man NT Warrior, just going over some of the stuff that they've created is like a trip down memory lane for me for the most part. Of just a few sleeper hits and a few really big, long-lasting hits that a lot of people just really enjoyed. Like a lot of the Love Hina specials. Say what you want about Love Hina, but man, that animation was on point. So tell me, did you watch Dai-Guard? Did you love Dai-Guard, or were you not feeling Dai-Guard? I'm actually interested to hear from people about this series because Dai-Guard doesn't really get a lot of spotlight for the most part. But it was a big part of my expansion into less mainstream anime back during the mid 2000s, and I would love to just hear people gush about it. So say what you want about Dai-Guard in the comment section below, and if you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. And until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din, and I will see you later. Bye bye.